Welcome to Reddit Reads, r/ProRevenge. Our first Reddit post is from Throwaway267,990. Neighbor's dogs kill coworker's cat. Coworker ruins their Christmas. Quick note, I was part of this story, but not the dealer nor receiver of the revenge. Years ago, I used to work with a receptionist in a vet clinic named Margot. Margot was and still is a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at this practice since it was opened some 40 years ago. She always had a smile, a joke, compliments, and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I had ever worked with, and she basically knew everyone from our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margot, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the trashiest, nastiest families I had ever met that had two even nastier pit bulls, I'm talking nastier than, that had been hoarded by dung beetles for years nasty. And these dogs were constantly escaping and terracing the neighborhood, even trying to get into her house. Margot had asked them more than once to please keep the dogs contained, especially since she had an elderly, fat cat named Smokestack, and these pits had attacked smaller animals before. The family basically told her to rot in hell, that they knew what they were doing, how dare she accuse the breed, yada yada, basically blowing her off. Margot knew there had been reports filed against her neighbors, but nothing had ever been done about it really. So she made sure to keep Smokestack in the house to keep him safe, and was very careful not to let him out. If you had been paying attention up until this point, you'll notice I'm using the word was and had regarding old Smokestack. And it was as awful as you think. 3 weeks before Christmas, Margot had the day off, and was in the garage with Smokestack fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pits next door got out and broke through the bottom of her garage door. They went right for Smokestack before she could blink and started to tear the cat apart. Margot screamed for help, and it was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Smokestack from the jaws of these dogs. I was working this day and will never forget when she came in crying harder than I had ever seen anyone cry in my life. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to bring Smokestack back, but we couldn't do it. It would have taken a miracle of God, and then some, and he passed away a truly crap way to go, in what should have been the golden years of his fat cat life. Margot sat there for a while with his mangled body, quietly crying for a while before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She told us all, "I've got a job to do, take care of him, girls," and then left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with family and then continue on with life as normal. We figured wrong. Now, when I say Margot knew everyone, I mean everyone. Right after she left the hospital, Margot gathered herself up and went to the police with pictures of poor Smokestack and told her story. The same police officers she had watched grow up over the last 20 years from rowdy middle schoolers she used to help babysit to the officers they were today. They were absolutely shocked to hear what had happened to their surrogate grandma and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margot's daughter. The judge granted an emergency dangerous animal extraction warrant to her neighbors. Of course, there was a hearing. Within 2 weeks, which I gotta admit was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs weren't aggressive. They even went so far as to accuse Margot of having it out for their family and making it all up. But their argument trickled when the dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented and finally completely dried out when Margot presented the surveillance video her grandson had gotten showing the dogs coming into her property and attacking poor Smokestack. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of her neighbor's dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margot heard a knock on her door. She opened it up to see the neighbors standing there sobbing uncontrollably. They were begging her to stop animal control, that they had these dogs. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved abominably. They didn't offer to fix the garage. They never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. Hell, they didn't even pay for Smokestack to be cremated. At no point had they even shown the slightest shred of remorse for what damage their dogs had done. And as the neighbors stood there blubbering and whimpering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas, Margot looked them straight in the eye and told them in her calmest voice, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours," and shut the door in their face just as animal control pulled up onto the driveway. Margot was not surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into the truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve, a perk from having known the A. Margot even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into their family, as the father proceeded to drunk drive to a telephone pole that same night, killing him instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so CPS picked up the kids by February. And ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Smokestack's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown at least some regret, she was still the person to forgive and forget. Or maybe she ultimately knew it had to be done, to push it to this point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thank you, Margot, for making the world a little bit safer for the pets in the world. And rest in peace, Smokestack. Hopefully I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna. TLDR, coworker's cat is killed by neighbor's dogs. Coworker destroys neighbor's family on Christmas Eve. This comment is from Spoofdis17. This actually seems like nuclear revenge material right here. This comment is from Throwaway267,990. I was debating that, but nuclear revenge seems intentionally, well, nuclear, and I don't think Margot intended for the whole family to basically implode. This comment is from Penguin. Good people will often be very tolerant and forgiving. But once you push them too far, your demons run when good women go to war. Now, a word from today's sponsor. Surfshark is an all-around VPN solution that can do everything from torrenting as well as streaming to browsing the dark web. Surfshark is one of the very best all-round VPN, terrific for Netflix, torrenting, confidential browsing, as well as staying safe on public Wi-Fi. Check out Surfshark today, link is in the description. Now back to the video. Our next Reddit post is from Unoriginalus. Tear open our driveway to pour concrete. Fine, you'll probably enjoy having to dig the concrete out of the ground. Twice. Not about me, but about a guy I used to work with. He was a mountain of a guy, a huge Turk, but the kindest guy I ever met. He'd do anything for people he liked. Nobody ever saw anybody get on this bad side until that fateful day. As it happens, he was also our delivery driver, and he spent most days on the road in his semi, leaving before dawn and returning quite late, if at all, that day. Our warehouse had a driveway large enough. The supermarket next door decided to do some renovations and expand. When they started construction, they started tearing out their brick parking lot and getting close to tearing out our driveway. Boss runs out, tells them where our property line is, and is assured they won't cross onto our property. Everybody goes back inside, nobody worries, until there's suddenly a raging bear Turk standing in the break room, shouting about how the driveway has been torn up and he can't get his lorry in. We go out, and indeed the driveway is half missing, and there's a concrete building foundation poured in. Construction workers are nowhere in sight. Boss sends the supermarket manager an email message, and everybody goes home. Next day, we arrive to the site of very angry construction workers. Apparently, the delivery driver went back in the middle of the night with some bolt cutters, liberated about 30 of their shopping carts, and stuck them into the drying concrete in various comical positions. Overnight, the concrete hardened, and the carts became quite difficult to remove. Construction crew brings in the jackhammers, and 4 days later, most of the concrete is gone, and they start preparing for another pour, this time leaving our driveway intact. Foundation comes out fine, everything is looking good. At that time, my boss shows up with the announcement that he had a survey done, and while they didn't tear open our driveway the second time, they were still closer to our property line than allowed, and he'd already filed a complaint to get the concrete removed. Took them another week of jackhammering to get it out. TL Drive construction crew tore open our driveway and poured concrete on our property. Gave them a physical reason to dig it out one time and a legal reason to dig it out a second time. This comment is from Eric Free. This story reminds me of a buddy I once had. He was a landscaper and one of his clients wanted him to build a pergola in their yard. No problem, he says. So he goes about drawing up plans, talking with the city, etc. Construction starts where things had been approved, and the neighbor comes out and complains that it's too close to the property line and everything must stop and be ripped out. Now, the neighbor wasn't nice about this and was being a total asset about the situation, completely unreasonable and unwilling to compromise in any way. So my buddy has the land surveyed, and what do you know, the property line is actually a few feet over, towards the neighbor's house, meaning not only was everything oak to continue, but in addition the neighbor had put up actually crossed the property line and came into the client's yard. Well, I'm sure you can see where this went. Mr. Unreasonable now had part of his house that wasn't on his own property, and remember, what goes around is all around. Very quickly he became the nicest guy anybody had ever seen, but it was too late. He was forced to rip down the addition that had been built all those years ago. This comment is from ProRevenge 4. I would have been tempted to ask for back rent rather than knocking it down. This comment is from Cord Bordeaux. A friend of mine also had this. Was building a pool in his backyard and had to put up a fence, dug all the post holes roughly 30 away from the house next door, and the elderly neighbors came out pissed because they were blocking the views. Does the whole call the Streetens to sue, so my friend gets a survey done. Turns out the property line is like 4 away from the side of the old guy's house. It was worth the extra money just to make sure that every window on the side of his house could see nothing but cheap tall fencing. That was Reddit reads r/ProRevenge. If you like this content, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified of new uploads. We upload new videos every day. Also subscribe to our Patreon, as that will help us a lot. See you next time.